just saying, eat fat and you'll burn fat. Right? That's basically it. It's a meat oil is developed for diabetics, especially when you measure ketones, especially for type 1 diabetics. They're trying to keep it low, I'm trying to keep it high, so everything's the opposite world. But yeah, that's the little meat that you can buy just at the chemist, and you get the strips. And it just so happens that Australia is the cheapest place in the world to get it. So they're about 4 times the price in the States. So, alright, so 1.2. Bit of a reference point, so that's where
and all of that keeps the results for some time, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it can like 1,000 blood tests in one of these.
Right, so
it's really good, and you can see the time, the date.
Yeah.
So I record everything I do and what I eat every day and when I do it, but you know, I take photos with my iPhone, everything I eat, that records the time and date, and even the time of day, obviously. And then you do that. So even if you don't write it down, if you just do those 2 things, you can always go back and write it all up properly and nice. But it's really important to collect good data. You know, it's a bit of a, you know, if you really want to be serious about looking after yourself and collect data, well, it's sort of a daily thing.
It's like when you weigh yourself and you think, I always this, and then a week later you think, oh, what was that? You know, if you don't record it.
Yeah. But anyway, I'll try and answer your questions as we go along, and but everything is sort of related back to my own experience. So that's sort of what where I come from. It's my proof is sort of what I've done, and I'll sort of be talking about that, what I think are the principles that apply to all of us from my own experience. We're all different, but there's some physiological things that seems to work for all human beings. So. Okay, so let's get started. So back in 2013 December, so almost 2.5 years ago, I was into long distance running. You can see I was spending a fair bit of time running. That was my physiological, my body weight, my body fat percentage, and if you worked, I had a body composition test done, and it turned out I had about 7.5 kilos of fat on me. Okay, so just stats. We'll talk about that as we go along. Now, just recently, here almost 2.5 years later, now I've stopped running. I'm mainly doing this high intensity training, but you add it all up, it's less than an hour a week. And I'm now lighter. I've got less fat. You know, I've lost about 1/3 of the fat I had when I was running over 100 kilometers a week. Okay, you put those stats beside each other, that's what it looks like. Dropped about 1 kilo in body weight. As your fat's gone down, percentage and fat, and my muscle mass has actually increased. If we really want to get technical, that's what happened. 2.5 kilos of pure body fat gone. My body weight is down about 1 kilo, and I've increased my muscle mass. And this was really achieved by eating plenty of this stuff. Fat.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we're sort of all told that, you know, eat fat, get fat, right? Yeah, and it sort of makes sense. I think that's why we bought into it. But maybe not, because otherwise, how could I do this? Maybe I'm a genetic freak. Maybe. I don't think so, though. So I'm not too keen on this sort of hypothesis. But please be aware, as everything I say, I am still just one person. Everything I talk about is my own experience. I've read the science and the books and everything, and I'm going to try to apply it. But my results are still based on me. And if I were to write a disclaimer, you know, at best I'm a self-experimenter who feels reasonably sure that I'm onto a few sound principles that apply to all of us. But there's a second one. Because I've made this work really well, I'm probably going to be a bit biased. Okay, so keep those 2 things in mind. However, I am just saying, eat fat and you'll burn fat. Right? That's basically how it works. And you do that obviously by eating high fat food. So what does that look like? Well, it could look something like that. fried eggs on top of sautéed kale or other greens. It could be a dish like that. Anyone want to take a guess at what that is?
Looks like a risotto.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty much just a burger, a minced burger. I was going to say a lean minced burger. It is fairly lean, but yeah, and just with a green salad. It's kale salad, roasted vegetables in a lot of fat in the oven, and then a cream sauce over the top. Or you could just make a salad like that, raw vegetables, egg on top, pour some olive oil on. This is one of my favourite meals. I have like a kale omelette for breakfast. So a lot of kale, saute it, add the egg, put some avocado on top. Obviously cooked in butter and on olive oil or coconut oil, all three. You can have that. That was I usually eat brunch. I usually don't eat breakfast. I usually eat late, sort of early lunch or late lunch. So I usually sometimes just have a salad with a lot of oil on. So that can be a high fat. You wouldn't sort of look at that and say, "Oh, that's a high fat meal," would you? And that's of course coffee with cream in it on the side there. Or as simple as this, just roasted vegetables in the oven. Okay, like Brussels sprouts and beans. So would you agree when we look at these photos that eating high fat food, it looks a bit like eating real food? It looks a bit like, doesn't really look sort of like it's from another planet, does it? But I think we've even become scared of real food today. People go, "Oh, real food, vegetables, what's that?" Especially if you combine the two, high fat and real food, then people are like freaking out. What the hell is going on? I mean, if we want to talk more about it, we're talking serious stuff like olive oil. And you add that and roasted vegetables in it. Coconut oil. Organic, imagine that. Fry your eggs in that. Now people are really freaking out, right? But not worst of all is like the animal fats. They're so demonized that you mention that, people just almost run away scared. And especially if you say you fried your asparagus in the oven and any of those. But this is okay, isn't it? Fruit's healthy, right? Okay. But what about if we add something to it like pure cream? Now it's scary again, isn't it? That's my dessert, by the way. Now there's a name for being scared of fat. Anyone want to take a guess at what it is?
Me.
Fat phobia. The world really is in fat phobia as far as I see it. Maybe we're coming out of it, as some of us are. So if you're not a fat phobic, then you're beyond fat phobia. Okay? So in a nutshell, if you want this, lose fat, gain muscle, bring your body weight down, simply don't be scared of fat and eat real food. That's it. And just remember, all these fats, they're the good guys. Don't be afraid of it. And there we go. That's it.
Wow.
That's the answer. Thanks for coming. So that was about 6 minutes.
Yeah.
But honestly, that is the answer. Or it's 90%. Okay, because before you go beyond fat phobia, there is no hope.
What's the other
Absolutely none.
10%?
We're going to talk about that. But it's like if people can't get beyond that, being scared of fat, that's why I call my site Beyond Fat Phobia. Don't bother actually reading my stuff or talking to me until you've decided it's not an issue, because I've decided long ago, and you know what? There's so much other stuff to work out on this other side. It's like, that's just the start of it. But you can't sort of come over and be over here and still be scared of fat. Anyway. So there's a little bit more to it. What's the last 10%? Well, let's talk about that. Personally, I'm beyond fat phobia. If you go into my website, you'll sort of see that's my tagline. Metabolic performance beyond fat phobia. But just keep in mind, I am still just that trial of one. Okay? Well, let's talk about fat. but a special kind of fat. There's a thing that's starting to come up in the shops called Mct Oil. It's an extract of coconut oil. You'll see these two brands, Melrose and Newy Life, and there's more coming. They're available at most health food shops. One being Govita and Mount Barker, which we're associated a little bit with. But more to the point, why is there all of a sudden a demand for this stuff? How's that? I mean, you don't just put a product on the shelf hoping somebody would buy it. Somebody's done some sort of research and this product is out there. Why? Well, recently, I was talking to somebody before, I went to a conference in Sydney, and it was held by what they call bioceuticals. You might have heard about the bioceuticcal line of nutrients, supplements, I mean. And they were serving that you could get this coffee. They were making that. Now, bioceuticals makes this product called MCT Active, which is MCT fat or MCT oil, and they're putting in this coffee. And I was at that conference to interview this guy here, who's one of the keynote speakers. And when I interviewed him, he's drinking the coffee with the MCT oil. Anyway, more about this guy later. If you read on one of those bottles, it says optimized for ketones. So that begs the question, well, what the hell are ketones? And why would you take a supplement that optimizes that? Well, the short answer is ketones are made from fat. That fat goes to our liver, and out the other side comes ketones. And that fat can be the fat on our body or fat through diet, especially something like MCT fat. That's some of the best to make ketones. You also find the ketones obviously in coconut butter, in coconut oil, because MCT is an extract of coconut oil. Also to some degree in dairy. But what we really want to know is why? Why would the body make ketones out some of the fat? That's the question. Well, the short answer is to maintain energy levels. Okay, we're going to get right into this, but basically if your blood sugar starts to drop, and that's where we get most of our energy, and we say that white line is sort of your energy level you need to maintain, well then ketones start to rise to make up that energy deficit. Okay, that's the short answer. At least according to one of my favourite books, which is my anatomy book. Looks a bit like the Bible, it's about that thick. And when I tell people that's my favourite book, they usually say to me, oh, you need to get out more. Which I probably do. Okay, well let's have a look at what's inside that book. If you go to, can't remember the exact page number, but this is a screenshot. You'll see basic fat metabolism. Okay, and you can probably find that shot in any anatomy book. They don't tend to vary that much. But do you guys ever wonder what, everybody throws around this term metabolism? Do you actually wonder what it means? Oh, my metabolism's slow, fast, this. Well, let's just ask the dictionary. It's the chemical processes that occur within the body to make energy. That's it. Also known as your body chemistry. Okay. Alright, well let's have a look at ketone metabolism. So you have your fat tissue, which I've highlighted there with your fat storage, and in technical terms it's called your adipose tissue. And you can see it's fatty acids, it's just some of the molecules it's the way we store fat. Actually, we break it right down. You store fat in what you call triglycerides. Then when you want to break that down and use that for energy, those triglycerides break apart, and to one side goes fatty acids and the other side goes glycerol, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the fatty acids, they go to your liver, as you can see, and then they get made into ketones, which go back into your blood, and now they can go, for instance, to your heart for energy. So it's just a very simple energy pathway. Yeah, everybody follow that? Mm-hmm. Yep. So that would be what happens if your blood sugar starts to drop, then basically your body's just drawing on your fat, and it can make ketones. Simple. But we can also see there's just fatty acid metabolism. Fatty acids can go just into your bloodstream, bypass the liver and go straight to your heart. So you can use those as energy as well. Okay? And we can see that in the anatomy book, not something I made up. Alright? And those fatty acids can also go the other way and fuel your muscles. Right? Straight into your blood, straight to your muscles for energy. That's what the book says. So if we look at that in my little drawing here, you say the red is your bloodstream, then you have a food source, and you can obviously get a food source that makes blood sugar, but you also eat fat, and you get fatty acids through that. So they go into your blood. The fatty acids maintain energy levels, and so does together with your blood sugar. Okay, so this works really well. Fatty acids and blood sugar, just from your diet. And then obviously some of the food we eat goes into sugar storage and fat storage, perfectly normal. We need to have a bit of storage so when we don't eat, we can draw on those reserves. Everybody follow this chart? Yep. So what happens is that if your food source, obviously when you don't eat for a little bit, or you don't have as much food, well you start, if you need to, you'll draw reserves out of your storage from your sugar and from your fat. Okay? All goes into the bloodstream, goes to where it needs to go. So we can see that the fatty acids can actually maintain energy levels to your heart and muscles. And not necessarily, we don't actually need ketones. So what is the deal with ketones and why is there products on the market now talking about ketones when it looks like, well, we don't actually, we can maintain energy levels without them. What is it that's so special about them? It turns out they're a very special fuel for our brain and nervous system. Now if we go back and zoom out from the anatomy page, we can see down the bottom there's your brain or your nerve tissue. If we zoom in on that, we can see it's just ketone bodies in the brain. So we can see that those ketones, as we looked at the metabolism before, they go from your fat storage to your liver, into your bloodstream, and then they can go to your brain.
Hello.
Okay?
Hi, Nana.
But see, we can also see there's no pathway for fatty acids. Can you see that?
Yeah, well, better.
The only other thing the brain can use is glucose.
She's just gone out to do some shopping.
So now, this is starting to tell us why we might need ketones. So the only two fuels the brain can use is blood sugar and ketones. It can't use fatty acids. And this is why we have the ability to do that. Does that make sense? Any questions so far on any of this? Clear as mud?
With the MCT or the coconut oils, are they complementary to the omega-3s, the fish oils, or separate to altogether? Like the benefits of the omega-3s compared to the MCT? Could you not use omega-3s at all and still get the health benefits from using the MCT oil? Or?
It's when you're talking MCT, it's more an energy supply.
Okay. Yeah.
The little knowledge I have on other fatty acids and stuff, it's more the building blocks. You know, all our cell membranes are made of basically fat and proteins. So the omega-3 is a very important building block.
Okay.
So it's more in that regard when you're talking omega-3, 6s and all that.
Okay. So different functions. Okay.
Yeah, it's a bit of it. It's all obviously fat, but we need, this is just fat, energy, and metabolism. I think the building blocks is just as important, if not more. But this is just to come at it from this end. That's why the last 10%, we were saying, this is the last 10%, but it's huge. Understanding how it all works. So that's the reason we have ketones. Basically, yes, to maintain energy levels, but energy levels to your brain. Okay, your body can't function without your brain. It doesn't matter how many fatty acids the rest of the body is getting. if you can't make blood sugar and you can't make ketones, you're stuffed. Alright? But if we look at the little word there beside ketones, it says starvation. So it seems like they're really made under certain circumstances. If we look at the definition of starvation on Wikipedia, severe deficiency in caloric energy intake needed to maintain life. To make extreme form of malnutrition. In humans, prolonged starvation can cause permanent organ damage and eventually death. So basically, you don't eat, you're going to die eventually. Doesn't sound too nice, does it? So ketones, it says there in my anatomy book, is a safeguard against dying, basically, if you don't have food. Which, again, could we speculate that ketones are pretty handy if we can't get food? Could we speculate that? Mm-hmm. Could we even say they're a safeguard against starvation or dying? That's why it's there. Could we also speculate that ketones might have served us well for millions of years? Yeah. I would even go as far as say ketones have allowed us to survive for millions of years. There wasn't always a supermarket around the corner. Right? So what would you do? You had to... If our forefathers hadn't had ketones, we probably wouldn't be here today. So what I'm trying to get at here is we're just tapping in to something that was always there. But now we've got to adapt to the lifestyle we're living today. But we've still sort of got this primal body. But the key is to understand that. It's going to work the way it's always worked for millions of years, and I'd say the next million years is going to work exactly the same. So we can't adjust it. We've got to adjust to it if we want to work really well. But I think it can be done and quite easily. But it's a bit of a statement still, isn't it? Millions of years, you know, we've done this for millions of years. Really? Well, somebody said to me, what about fasting a couple of weeks, Mr. Self-Experimenter? So I said, okay. Well, actually, that was just me talking to me. So, so I stood over there and I went back and said, okay, let's do it. All right. So what's fasting? Well, go back to the Oxford Dictionary. Abstain from all or some food. Right? Reduce your food drastically. You don't eat anything at all. So what happens is that fasting should mimic the body's response to starvation. Yeah? If we just look at the basic anatomy. So it's just sort of, if we look at fasting, it's just a milder form of starvation. Right? We're not eating, which is what you'd be doing if you're starving, so we should get the same response from the body, which one would be ketones. So it should work something like this. So I was trying to work out, okay, well this fasting, so that should work like that. Okay, I don't eat, so I'm going to get no fatty acids, no sugar from that. It's all going to come out of my sugar stores, my fat stores. Fatty acids will go to the heart and muscles. That little sum there with the arm, that's the muscles, if you hadn't worked that out. And that little fill up there, I'm good, that's your brain. Okay? So while we can draw enough energy, especially to the brain from the sugar stores, brain's happy. That's why he says, I'm all good, you know. But then you start fasting, and those sugar stores start to drop. Pretty soon, your brain goes not happy at all. Right? Now you're sort of trying to illustrate here, it's dropped below the level where the body likes to keep it. But look at the heart and the muscles, they're quite happy, aren't they? And can you see also how big the reserve of fat is to the sugar? We've got a lot bigger fat reserve. So they're smiling away, and pretty soon the brain's just going, I'm not happy. Like pretty much 24 hours later, your brain's not happy if you don't eat. And that's because, again, it can only use blood sugar or ketones. It can't use the fatty acids. That's why the brain gets unhappy very quickly. You ever been grumpy when you don't eat? Yeah? Well, you're lacking energy to the brain, right? But this is when ketones should kick in if the body works properly. It's a normal evolutionary process. And what's the brain saying again? I'm all good now. Right? So it's just a normal physiological response to starvation, and if you don't eat for a little bit, it should kick in. So what's the problem today where, you know, we are unhappy because we don't eat for half an hour. Well, obviously this is not kicking in, isn't it? Because we get very unhappy, some of us, because we're just running this pure sugar metabolism, and fatty acids might be getting to the rest of our body, but ketones aren't kicking in when our blood sugar drops. So we just keep eating. We have to. But that's also the problem. We're going to get to how we solve that too. Is this pretty clear, this chart, when you sort of how that all works?
When our levels drop like that, that's when a lot of people would maybe go for a sugar hit to get their energy levels back up again?
Yeah, that's exactly right, because that's what happens. There's no ketones kicking in. This drops below where the energy needed to function in the brain, and so if you can't have ketones kick in, there is no other fuel. So you have to top up this. That's the simple answer, yeah. That's exactly what happened. So even though we're not in starvation, we pretty much are fasting between each meal, aren't we? Yeah? So I actually think that mild ketosis is a normal state that we probably should be in most of the time. So anyway, I embarked on this fast. January 2015, a bit over a year ago. And I've been, actually my weight has shot up a little bit because I've been experimenting with carbohydrates, believe it or not. But that's another story. I started fasting, hoping it would work like I read about. That when this would work like that. And what I heard other people do. So 16 days later, I've written extensively about this on my blog and documented this whole 16 days. But I basically 4 days with no food. Then I ate a little bit for two or 3 days, and then I ate nothing again for 10 days.
Wow.
Very hard.
I pretty much I never gave up coffee and cream, so I probably had 100 calories a day, or 50. So yeah, I had 2 cups of coffee a day, and water. And 16 days later, on the 20th of January, I weighed in at just over 60 kilos.
What did you do about salt?
Good question, because I also read that, but here's a few things. I've read that you do need salt. I never took salt.
You didn't at all?
And because I never really... Well, what I read, it didn't actually make that much sense, even though the people I do think knows the most say to take salt. But then since I've written other books, and I don't actually... I didn't do it. I haven't had any visual or any perceivable issues.
Okay.
It's almost another subject. I'm just experimenting on myself. I'm not saying it's not the case, and I'm not even saying that I may even function better if I did. I just sort of try it out myself.
So you kept functioning.
Yeah.
I think I read that you broke it because you weren't sleeping. You just couldn't get to sleep. Is that right?
Yeah. My blood sugar sort of dropped down to what you got, about 60 mils.
So how does that convert?
It's
to
about
it's
about just over about 3.5.
Okay.
Yeah. It dropped as low as about 3, but I've been a bit lower than that since. But that was even, I'd actually just, I was just wired, and then, but I was feeling great, but I just couldn't, get to sleep. And so, okay, I'll break it now, and I'll just read a bit more, and I was fairly sure there's nothing wrong, but it's just like, you're wired there at 10 o'clock at night.
So you wanted to switch your brain off, but your body was saying,
it's very
I
hard,
don't
and then,
need to.
yes, so, and actually we're going to get a little bit into maybe why that is, but basically, ketones are very good fuel for your brain. So all of a sudden you're feeding them this better fuel, and I think that's part of the reason. I know specifically when I'm doing something like this, I try to make sure I'm in ketosis like I am now, because it's just the best for mental clarity to be in ketosis. I'm just so used to it. I know when I'm not in it, and I just try to stay in it most of the time.
What's the length of time? I've heard that most people only really need to survive on about 4 hours sleep.
I try to get as much sleep as I can. Actually, it's another thing I'm really interested in now. Sleep is like... Actually, I was listening to a podcast with Lance Armstrong, the former hero, now villain. And he said, you know what? The biggest performance-enhancing drug you can take is sleep. Yeah? Like they're just trying, talk about, well, you want to talk about poor performance-enhancing? The things that happen when we sleep, and we sleep well, is amazing. So, I would never, ever try to be a sleep hero. I have tried that, but I've never tried to do it again. So anyway, what happened in that 60-day fast, I lost about 6.6 kilos, about 10% of my body weight. And I did show these pictures, actually in Thailand at the time, and somebody said, oh, it looks like you lost muscle. Well, I don't know, I can't see on that. I would argue I didn't. But really there's no way to tell because I only weighed myself. I didn't do any body composition scans. But the reason I would actually argue that I didn't lose muscle is because of what I did during the fast. Like for the first 5 days of the fast, I ran these hill sprints. And I ran faster on day 5 than I did on day 1. So 5 days with no food. And my exercise regime was still, I was hiking morning and night, so I'd done about 45-minute hike in the morning, and then at night I'd do my sprints as well. So I wasn't totally inactive. And then on the last day, on the 16th day, I practiced my handstand and I could hold it longer than I ever had. So this is 10 days with zero food in your system. And that's actually the top of my hike, hiking up to the top of this mountain. So I'm starting to see there's something going on here that's really cool, basically. So to me, I could say, well, that fat metabolism in my favourite anatomy book seems to work. And as I said, if you go into my blog, I've actually written extensively about that particular experience and my blood numbers and everything. So I wasn't measuring ketones at the time, just after I started, so I was just measuring my blood sugar. However though, can blood sugar go too low? Is that possible? Hypoglycemia in technical terms? Well, if we just look up on Wikipedia what that is, cut a long story short, if you don't get any blood sugar, you are going to die. There might be very little, but that's what it says. So, is there any safeguards in the body that make sure that doesn't happen? You think? Anybody see that little red thing, what that is?
Red blood cell?
Yes. So there's two things in your body that actually does need blood sugar. Your red blood cells. And it looks like even though your brain can run on ketone, it does need some blood sugar. Because otherwise we probably would stop making it, wouldn't we? And it turns out, so if you're fasting and you're not eating anything, if you've got these big fat stores, is there a mechanism in your body that will make blood sugar? It turns out yes. There's a thing called gluconeogenesis, basically the making of blood sugar. Okay, you look this up on Wikipedia, it's a pathway. They generate glucose from certain molecules in the body. So what molecules in the body would make blood sugar if you're not eating? Any ideas? Well, if you read on in Wikipedia, glycerol is one. Remember glycerol from the fat tissue? Remember how we said the triglycerides break apart, fatty acid goes one way, and then the glycerol goes the other way. That goes into the liver, goes through the liver, and out the other side comes glucose. So you're actually making sugar from your fat. Pretty cool. So see how you can make sugar, even though if you eat no sugar, you just eat fat, you still got the ability to make sugar. Because it's part of the fat molecule. Understand that? Mm. So this is basically just fat, or part of the fat, goes to your liver, and then that feeds into your blood sugar. So what I'm trying to say, if people say, oh, your blood sugar, and you'll just pass out and stuff, well, That's also if you can't make ketones. Remember this is during fasting, so this is basically some of what my body was doing. So I had plenty of fat. Obviously I lost 6 kilos. But then for the little bit of blood sugar I did need, I mean, let's say it's running 75% on ketones, the brain, and it only needs like 25% of that energy level from blood sugar. Well, I can probably make that just from the breakdown of fat. No worries. So that's one safeguard your body has, right? And even if people that start eating no carbohydrates, even if they can't make ketones, and they can't energize the brain through ketones, then the body will still make glucose somehow if it needs it, right? Any others? Well, it's actually glycogen. Ready glycogen? It's just a stored form of sugar, okay? And it's mainly stored in your liver. You can store some in your muscles, but that sugar we store in the muscles can only get used in the muscles. Right? So you got a bit of sugar stored in your liver for your brain, basically. So here, that's what you call liver glycogen. It's just sugar stored in your liver, and that can be released. So there's always some store there. It's never quite empty. So that's safeguard number 2. You can just draw on your storage. Any more? You were alluding to something before?
Protein.
It can actually be made from protein. Okay, this is what Wikipedia says, and Wikipedia says it, it must be true, right? But it actually is. Even when you look at my anatomy book, you can see here muscle will get broken down into what we call amino acids. Amino acid is just the building blocks of protein, or the substrate. And those amino acids can then go to your liver, and then the body will make them into sugar, and now we have blood sugar. So it's got many, and there's probably more different ways that I don't even know about. Right? So your body's got all these safeguards long before we cark it. It's got a lot of different ways to make energy. Okay? And that basically looks like that on my chart. You know, you can draw protein out of your muscles, go to your liver, and that just gets converted into. So you can strip all the fat off you and all the muscle off you before you're going to cark it, if you start fasting, right? And you can live a long time on what we have.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
How was your mental state over those 10 days?
It's surprisingly, I put together my first talk. It's just you're wired basically. And the more I read about ketone metabolism and what ketones do is just fascinating. Like, I stay in it because, well, I like it, but I think it's also one of the most healthy states to be in. The latest I heard now, I just found a podcast with a guy called Richard Beach, one of the oldest scientists studying just ketones with the NIH, the National Institute of Health in America, for 47 years. That's all he's done. And he says now, you know what, they talk about everything they do. And one of the biggest protections it gives you is protection against radiation. So he said we should actually be stockpiling. Now they're getting to the stage where actually there's products coming on the market. I've even got some here I can show you. From the States, you can buy ketones that are synthetically made in the lab. And they're on the market just in the last year. This is moving so quick what these do, and because it's just a food, it's just a supplement, there's not much regulation on it, which is good. You know, you can't, no drug company can get a patent on it. You can get a patent on the formula. But I've also followed the chemist who's pretty much developed this in the lab. So it's very, very exciting, and personally I don't think there's a need for supplements. I think they could have a role, but at the moment they're very expensive, and you can pretty much just work out how your body works and do it yourself. And I think it's probably, the more we can do it with food and not override a body with too many steps, I think the safer it is too. So like if you just have the food that produces ketosis, I think you're a lot safer than taking something. It might still be fine, but now you're not giving your body a choice to go into ketosis. It's going to go into ketosis because you've just put ketones straight into the blood. And I think it's a good thing. I can't see anything harmful.
What do you mean by the food that produces ketosis?
So MCT oil, like we talked about.
Do you mean ketones? The food?
Ketone. No, MCT oil is like a substrate for ketones. It's one of the best things, easiest things you can eat, and it'll make ketones the easiest in your body.
So ketosis is the state that your body...
When you're using...
When you, and you might talk about it in a minute, but a lot of people get ketoacidosis mixed up with ketosis. So ketoacidosis...
And that's why it's got the whole... You mentioned ketones, and I said even this meat I showed you, it's made for type 1 diabetic that are looking at their ketones, making sure they don't rise. And I'm actually trying to get them to rise. I'm looking for type 1 diabetics that they're not. But see, type 1 diabetic, the problem with them is they can't produce insulin. It's not actually the ketones or the blood sugar. They can't produce the insulin which puts the energy into their cells. That's the problem. So if those things, ketones or blood sugar, rise in the bloodstream, they become toxic. If you even look at the literature, it says it only happens in type 1 diabetics.
Yeah.
And then you're talking, like I just measured mine before, 1.2. You're talking 10 or 20 with it before you even start thinking about that. I've been at above 8.
Wow.
The meter only goes to 8, so I've been above that, you know. So that's where they say, it says, you know, maybe you should start to worry, you know, but it's almost impossible to go there if you are producing insulin and stuff. It's just, it's only it's a disease, and it only happens in that. But it gets mixed up with this and just, ketones are all bad.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's like, what about blood sugar? Blood sugar is toxic. We don't discard that. We don't say, let's get rid of blood sugar. Well, you die. So is gluconeogenesis just a cool mechanism in the body, or does it tell us something really important? Well, we sort of pretty much just talked about it. Look, it's probably still very crucial, even when you're in ketosis. The only reason I sort of mention that, because when you sort of get into this low carb and keep your blood sugar low and ketones, we almost tend to then make blood sugar evil. It's got to get low, it's almost got to disappear. You know, like you just go from one extreme to the other. But it's all a balance. Okay. Now your body wouldn't have all these safeguards if it didn't need this stuff. But it maybe makes sense that if you don't push too much down your throat, it'll just make what it needs. That sort of makes sense to me. And the more I'm looking at the physiology and how we've evolved, that makes sense. So far we talked about ketone, what they are. They're made from fat, they go through your liver, and they can be used by your brain in the face of, say, starvation. And if we fast, then we don't eat, that mimics that mechanism. And the only other energy your brain can use is glucose. So it's sort of, you can see how that arrow of glucose is very thin. So if that drops, then ketones should take over. It's pretty logical, isn't it? You think about it, and we look about how big our fat stores are. It's just a natural safeguard that should kick in. There's nothing mystical or dangerous about it. In fact, we couldn't have survived without it. And yet we have this sort of attachment to ketoacidosis. It's all bad. And I used that mechanism, tapped into that, and I lost 10% of my body weight in 16 days. And I showed you how I did that. And that's basically a chart what happened. My anatomy chart, right? So I drew from my fat stores, which was the weight loss. But that also fueled both my brain, my muscles, my heart, in fact my whole body, quite well. And I told you how I sprinted faster on day 5 than day 1 of my fast, and I did a handstand for longer than I ever had. So obviously, we're meant, we can do this quite safely. And I'm still here, so I'm still talking to you. Okay. So, who likes the idea of fasting for weight loss? I didn't really see anybody jump up and go, swing your arms and...
It works.
So I was sort of anticipating that, so I thought you might say, look, the 10% weight loss sounds good, but the 16 days
Oh, God, I don't know,
fasting
like,
is...
How do you do it? I'd be like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Feed me.
Big no. You have to big no around.
So is what you're saying, are you saying, look, I'll take the 10%, but forget about the 16 days?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I end up
But
drowning as people as that.
I did start this presentation by saying, eat fat, burn fat, didn't I? So I can't really go back on my words, so... Okay. Who's excited a bit more? Who's excited about more body chemistry?
Good.
One? Yeah, everybody else feels a bit more like this? Well, for those who said yes, you need to get out more. Okay.
That's really interesting.
Okay, so I pretty much we're going to have a small break here.
Yeah.
It's probably not quite halfway, but around that we'll just take just to not get too saturated.
Yeah. Let's do it.